Shavua Tov. The Jewish people, the state of Israel, there are other nations in the world that have a bit of a problem with us. How do we deal with that problem? How do you solve a problem like anti-Semitism? A couple of weeks ago, I think there's something in our Parsha. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the strange contrast between the way the Jewish people is supposed to treat the Egyptians as opposed to those from the nations of Ammon and Moab. We are commanded to not despise an Egyptian because we were strangers in his land. Whereas Ammon and Moab, we are to never allow them to join in the congregation of the Lord. So obviously they are worse than the Egyptians, which is kind of hard to understand because, well, the Egyptians, they enslaved us for nearly a century. They threw the baby boys into the river. They attacked us directly. They hurt us terribly. And yet we're not supposed to despise them. Whereas what did the Ammonim and Moabim, who can never join the Jewish people, what did they do? Well, they didn't bring us catering. They didn't bring us food and water when we were leaving Egypt. And they hired Bilam to curse us, who in the end blessed us instead of cursing us anyway. And so for that, they may never come into the congregation of God. Seems to be backwards. And we explained that the Egyptians never hated the Jewish people. They were just afraid of them. Whereas the Ammonim and Moabim, they hated the Jewish people, and hatred is far worse. We can see in our Parsha that not only did the Bnei Mitzrayim, that the Egyptians, did they not hate the Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites, they even respected them and even, I could say, had a sense of awe about them. Now let's examine the relationship between Pharaoh and the Jewish people. Now the first thing that I always wonder about is the 3-day thing. God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh, ask to go for 3 days and bring a sacrifice. Isn't this a little bit dishonest? I mean, nobody expects that the Jews are going to come back to Egypt. The Israelites are going to return after 3 days. Even Pharaoh knows it. He keeps trying to put in conditions to make it impossible for them to run away. He says, first you can go, only the men, not the women, not the children. Then, okay, take the women and the children, but you can't take the animals. No, okay, then, but you can do it here in the city. Don't go too far, stay close. And then finally he says, listen, I see there is evil in front of your faces. In other words, that you're planning to run away. It's obvious, and it's true, it was obvious. So what was that about? So the first explanation is that God is not a trickster. How one could even say that? It's impossible to say such a thing. God is the ultimate truth. But God works through midah keneged midah. The punishment fits the crime. And one could say that the Bnei Israel were victimized by changing the rules in the middle. They were invited to Egypt as honored guests. They didn't expect to come to become slaves and forbidden to leave. An honored guest can come and then they can go when the time comes. So they changed the rules on us in the middle. And according to the Midrash, how did the Egyptians enslave the Israelites? They announced a national project. Everybody is going to join in this national building project. And of course, the Jews are always the greatest patriotic citizens in any country we live. So they come out, and Pharaoh himself comes out, and he lends a shoulder. But then on the second day, Pharaoh doesn't come out, and then the Egyptians begin to, one by one, go back home. And who keeps working? The Jews, and so they can continue until they become slaves. So they change the rules in the middle, attribute for attribute. This is, the punishment fits the crime. Therefore, we change the rules in the middle too. We will go 3 days, and then we're not coming back. And actually, I don't think it says anywhere that Moses says to Pharaoh that we're going to come back. He just says we want to go 3 days in the wilderness. It may be implied that after 3 days they'll come back, but he doesn't say it. But there's also a psychological thing, which is a very useful psychological trick that we all can use, because many people have a problem with procrastination. There are projects and things that we know that we want to do, that we should do, and some of them are on the level of even life aspirations, but we never do them. And the reason is because we're afraid. We're afraid we're going to fail. We're afraid it's beyond our abilities. And the solution is usually just a baby step or 2 or 3, doing little things, just getting started. And then all of a sudden, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're way on your way with momentum, and it's a life-changing thing. It could be that that's exactly what God was telling Moshe to tell Pharaoh. You know that morally you need to liberate this people. It's not appropriate for them to be slaves, but it's hard for you to make such a final thing to let them go. So let them go just for 3 days, and you'll feel differently when that happens. It could be that that's the psychology as well. At any rate, there is an evolution in Pharaoh's feelings towards the Jewish people. First of all, at the beginning, towards God. at the beginning, he says, the first time that Moses and Aaron confront him, he says, "Who is God that I should listen to his voice? I don't know your God, and I'm not going to send Israel out." And towards the end, he knows God very well. He keeps saying, "Okay, you can sacrifice to God and pray for me." He asks 2 or 3 times, "Pray for me." So obviously Pharaoh has now recognized that this God that he didn't know at the beginning is quite powerful and worth it for the Israelites to pray on his behalf. So we see that Pharaoh himself has already accomplished a lot in terms of his growth of understanding of just how powerful God is. But when he asks for the Bnei Israel to pray for him, that's a very significant thing. The other significant thing is the respect that we find for the Israelites and for Moses in particular. The pasuk says, the verse says that the man Moses was very great in the eyes of the servants of Pharaoh and in Egypt. How so? What did he do to earn that respect? Well, there's already a hint to our answer, and that is Moses was a straight shooter. He was not afraid of anybody. He came into Pharaoh, to the king himself, whom the Egyptians worshipped as a god, and Moses yells at him. Moses sets him straight. Moses gives God's message without bending, without compromising, without flattering, without making faces of niceness. He was very direct, and people respected the honesty, the inside and outside being unified. They respected that tremendously. And that is an important lesson. We're going to get more on that in a few moments. But when Pharaoh asks the Bnei Israel to pray for him, that's interesting. Why does he do that? It's not just that he's asking Moses to pray to stop the current plague, whatever one it is. I think that he's asking Moses to pray for the Egyptians, not just because he now recognizes the power of the Israelite God, but also for psychological reasons. You know, when a person is angry at someone, hates someone or resents someone, if they wish to improve their feelings toward that person without that person apologizing, because it's very hard to apologize, as we know, so they should pray for that person. When you pray for someone you hate them less. We have a story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditcha, was a great Hasidic rabbi, that he had enemies in his town who wanted to get rid of him, and one day they put his wife and kids on a wagon and sent them out of the town. And when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's students found out about it, they were furious. They said, "Let's go to the synagogue and curse these people who did this terrible thing." And the students realized it's not going to work, because Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is probably right now in the synagogue, standing in front of the Holy Ark, begging God's mercy on those who did this to his wife and children. Because when you pray for someone whom you are angry with and even resent, it lowers the resentment. You fix at least what's in your heart. And that's an important thing. And maybe Pharaoh is seeking to cause the Bnei Israel to feel better about the Egyptians, to not hate the Egyptians, to be merciful to the Egyptians. "Pray for us," says Pharaoh. That's really quite a remarkable thing. And he does it 2 or 3 times. And then he does it at the end, at the very end, when he says to Moses, after the firstborns have died, he finds Moses and he says, or he sends a message to him, whatever it may be, he says, "Uverachtem gamoti," you shall also bless me. Why is it also bless me? So Rashi says you should bless me that I shouldn't die because I'm a firstborn, says Pharaoh. But there's a great commentary, Rav Salman Sorotskin, in his book Oznaim LaTorah, who says, but the word shouldn't be then you shall bless, it should be you should pray. Berachtem, you shall bless me. He's looking for something more than a prayer. He's looking for a blessing. And when you bless someone, obviously you have positive feelings towards them. So again, we see Pharaoh trying to get the Israelites to feel more positively towards the Egyptians. But the word gam, also, you shall also bless me, is a little bit out of place. So there are two explanations for that Rav Sorotskin gives. One is that Pharaoh is using another psychological trip to get the Bnei Israel to feel good about Egypt, the concept of reciprocity. That when somebody does a favor for somebody, they want to return it. This is the technique used by every auto salesman. They give you mints, they give you the nice smelling thing in the car, they give you a free car wash so that you continue to bring your business to them. It's reciprocity. And so Pharaoh is saying, I prayed for you. When did he pray for us? Well, in the previous plague, he had said, Yehi chen Hashem imachem, may it thus be so that the Lord shall be with you as I send you and your children. So that's a blessing. So he says to Moses, I blessed you. You shall also bless me back. So he's really working hard to get the Jewish people to like the Egyptians. He doesn't want them to hate the Egyptians. But it goes beyond that. The Egyptians respect the Israelites, and it says it a couple of times. And why do they respect them? One of the explanations is that there was the plague of darkness. When the Israelites were preparing to leave Egypt, they needed to receive gifts from the Egyptians. They were commanded to. God said to Moses that the people have to ask for gifts. And so they wanted to know what their Egyptian neighbors had to give them. So during the plague of darkness, they went into their homes to scout out the territory, to see where do they keep the encyclopedias and whatever else they wanted to take with them. But they did not steal a single thing. And when the Egyptians came out of the plague of darkness and they knew, they were amazed at the honesty of the Jewish people. And that's an important thing. Honesty is, together with what Moses, when he stood before Pharaoh and didn't compromise his message, that is honesty. Honesty is truth, and truth is God's signature. So honesty and truth go together. And we'll see that even more as we analyze why, according to Rabbi Sorotskin, did Pharaoh really need the Bnei Israel to bless the Egyptians after the plague of the firstborn had already taken place? What was the blessing? Says Rav Sorotskin, the Egyptians knew, Pharaoh knew that Egypt was a wasteland. There had been plagues of cattle disease. There was hail, which killed all of the flocks that had not died in the cattle disease. And then there was locusts that destroyed all of the crops. Egypt was a mess. They were going to starve. The only hope for them to survive would be if the Nile River would rise up and once again flood the lands of Egypt and make them fertile so that they could quickly grow food in order to survive. That's what Pharaoh wanted a blessing for, because Pharaoh knew that back in the day when Jacob came to Egypt, the waters of the Nile rose up in his honor, in his merit, and he brought a blessing. He even blessed Pharaoh to Egypt. So that blessing, Pharaoh now understands that the Israelites are bringing tremendous blessing to Egypt. So just like Jacob brought a blessing that Egypt was able to survive because the river rose up and the famine ended, so too you shall bless also. That's the also. You shall also bless me so that the river shall rise and we will have sustenance here in Egypt. What do we see from all of this? That Pharaoh didn't want the Bnei Israel to leave. He felt that they were such a blessing for Egypt because he had tremendous respect for them. And how did they earn that respect? We talked about honesty. One other element. The Shabbos before Pesach is called the Great Shabbos, Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Sabbath. Why so? Because in that particular year it came on the 10th of Nisan. What was significant about that date, the 10th of Nisan? That was the date when the Israelites were commanded to set aside the animal that was going to be killed as the Passover sacrifice. And the Egyptians worshipped those animals, and here the Israelites are taking them, tying them up and saying, we're going to sacrifice this. In other words, the Israelites are being truthful. They're not hiding their Jewishness. And on the night of Pesach itself, they put the blood on the door, on the lintels, and on the sides, in order to basically say, what we have done is taken your God and killed it and sprinkled the blood, and we're now going to eat its meat. In other words, they said, we are not afraid of you. It reminds me of a translation of Onkelos when the brothers of Joseph come to Egypt and they're sitting to eat. The Egyptians seat separately and the Israelites are seated separately, and the Onkelos translates, because the God that the Egyptians worship, the Hebrews are eating. It's a little humorous, but that's exactly it. And I think that that's the secret, the honesty of being Jewish and not hiding it, not being embarrassed by it, but being proud of it, living it, following the commandments, believing in the Torah, believing in the values of the Torah, even if they are politically incorrect. That is what is the source of honor and respect. Even Bil'am, who was summoned to curse the Bnei Israel, when he saw the beauty of their tents of Torah, he could not curse them. He had to bless them because we got respect. So we gain respect when we are honest, when we are truthful, and we are proud to be Jews and do not hide it and do not feel ashamed of it. The opposite, when we live it fully, inside and outside. Now, as for the haters, that's a little harder. But Jacob achieved a temporary peace with his brother when he reached out his hand in brotherhood and gave his brother a gift. And I think those two things are the key for us dealing with those in the world that have a difficult time with us. First of all, being very proud of who we are and not hiding it and not being embarrassed with it. of it, but also reaching out a hand in brotherhood to all of humanity, and thus we can create more unity in the whole world. Shavuot Tov.